Arctic security has become a top priority for NATO. It's why it's just launched Arctic Sentry, a new mission tasked with defending the region. It's been thrust into the spotlight in part because of the US president's threats to take over the Danish territory of Greenland. In Munich, I sat down with the former president of Iceland, now chairman of Arctic Council, the largest organisation for promoting dialogue on the future of the region. Chairman, thank you so much for joining me. You were in politics, you have been in politics for a long, long time. You have met many politicians, both as president of Iceland and also in your dealings outside of that. When you come here to Munich, for example, this year, and you hear leaders getting flustered by remarks from J.D. Vance last year, then, from Marco Rubio this year, and leaders start questioning who is committed to who, you must take all of that with a pinch of salt.
Yes, I do, because I think people should not be perhaps too much alarmed about it, because there is a larger world out there. Of course, the München Security Conference was established when the Atlantic relationship was the predominant feature of the global system. That is no longer so. There are, of course, participants here from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa. They perhaps do not have a primary place on the main stage, and therefore the picture that is being seen is the kind of split between the present administration in the United States and the old established European leadership. And I don't see how that can be repaired, quite frankly. So perhaps for the first time, I cannot really acknowledge a shared framework of intellectual perception of how to deal with the world. That existed before, but I think that intellectual reference of how we understand the world, how we want to conduct the affairs, is gone.
Let's talk about, many people pinpoint J.D. Vance's speech last year as a turning point. That was the moment that things changed. Do you think that the situation with Greenland over the last few months was also another turning point?
Well, I don't think the J.D. Vance speech was a turning point. I think it was the first time that the European leadership became brutally aware that America was changing. Those transformations had been taking place in the United States for a number of years. And I think we should now acknowledge that although we focus on Donald Trump, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of very brilliant people, established people, people who have succeeded in many different fields, have graduated from some of the best universities in the United States, who share this new view of the world. And that was the core of Vance's speech. And when the policy document was published in December, we then saw the extensive intellectual background for the foundation for the speech that J.D. Vance made. Some people who were here a year ago went away thinking that Vance's speech was some kind of a freak show. But gradually, I think people have discovered this is the reality of the America that elected Donald Trump. And there, as I say, there's a whole army of very bright, clever people who are the backbone of this new administration. So even if Trump disappeared all of a sudden, I think this community or crowd of people will continue to conduct this new worldview. And Greenland is only yet one more example of how they look at the world. And what became clear here, especially from the leadership of Denmark and Greenland, who spoke very openly, is that the Greenland saga, if we call it that in a polite way, is far from over. Is far from over. Yes, there are some negotiations now taking place, but nobody knows whether they will result in any conclusion accepted by the Kingdom of Denmark, the people of Greenland, or even by the Trump administration. So uncertainty is the paramount character that I at least live with here.
One thing the issue of Greenland did do was it thrust Arctic security as a dominant issue. Do you think that it took far too long for that to come to the forefront?
Well, I established the Arctic Circle, which is a global gathering of players from different parts of the world concerned with the Arctic more than a decade ago. And it has now grown into, together with Davos and the München Security Conference, as the largest gatherings in Europe of this kind. Because we believed that there were processes taking place that were making the Arctic the new centerpiece of a geopolitical race with economic dimensions, security dimensions, climate dimensions, between the leading countries of Asia, leading countries of Europe, as well as North America. So this new awareness of the Arctic is not because of Donald Trump. There are underlying transformative processes that make this part of the world, which, as I often say to people, don't look at flat maps on a wall. Look at the globe. And when you see it from the top, you see the north, you realize that the Arctic is the neighborhood that links North America to China and Russia. And sooner or later, it was bound to become a crucial area, especially if you throw in the enormous resources, mining, energy, you throw in the new shipping lines, you throw in the huge ocean resources, and you throw in the missile military technology, and now more recently, the new space race between a few big players like US, China, maybe a few others, because the planet is shaped in such a way that the most advantageous place to put the ground stations in this space race are in the Arctic. Because most people just think about space. They don't realize we need ground stations in order to be utilized the advantages that the big powers can gain from space. And there the Arctic comes into play. So maybe one of the reasons why Trump is so keen on getting Greenland, to put it that way, is that they have concluded maybe that they need that territory in order to be able to win the new space race with China and perhaps a few other players.
Well, you know the region better than anyone. They've just announced Arctic Century off the back of NATO this week. We don't really know what it looks like yet or what they plan to do there, but what is needed to accurately protect a region like that in such a vast region?
Well, you are not the only one who doesn't know what it means. I doubt very much if NATO at this particular time knows what it means. It has been taken as a clear military plan. It is not. It is more of a framework, and it needs to be evolved. It will be based on national contributions. And then we come back to the question of money, because to enhance military capability up in the Arctic is hugely expensive. It requires enlargement of navies, big time. It requires icebreakers. The US has only one. Russia is paramount in terms of icebreakers. It requires a modernization of the geo gap, which will be very expensive. It also requires a kind of satellite presence of the kind that most NATO members in Europe are not capable of. So I think the big question about the enhanced NATO presence in the Arctic is who is going to pay for it?
Under your presidency, it was the first Western European country to do so. You've been invited many times to Gaza, and you have a better perspective than most on the crisis there. 1 week before Donald Trump's peace board meets, is it a way forward or is it just a vanity project?
Well, unfortunately, I can't really give you an answer to that, because that part of the world is so complicated, so difficult, so unpredictable, and so full of fundamental challenges and confrontations that it's very difficult to find a path forward. We've been trying in the West, especially American leadership, for decades. And yes, we have had dialogues with the Palestinian authorities, not with Hamas, but the Palestinian Authority for a long time.
Iran and nuclear. You were there at the Reykjavik summit of 1986 with Reagan and Gorbachev on nuclear disarmament. The final treaty between Russia and the US expired recently, and it has led to the resurgence of fears of national security and peace. Do you share those fears?
I do, yes, because I'm old enough to remember those decades where the Cold War and the nuclear arms race was at its peak, and how difficult, extraordinarily difficult it was to move out of that. And don't forget that when Reagan and Gorbachev met in Iceland, everybody wrote it off as a failure, although we now know it was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. So yes, it's one of my fears now when we see all of that unraveling. And the difference now compared to the 1970s and the 1980s is that now there are a number of other countries that have nuclear capability. So it's not just the question of Russia and the US, as it was primarily during the Cold War, but how to keep Pakistan, Iran, a number of other countries, North Korea, perhaps Israel to some extent, within the responsible framework of dealing with nuclear weapons. And that is why some of the leading figures in American foreign policy in the second half of the 20th century came to the conclusion in the early part of this new century that it was in America's interest to abolish all nuclear weapons.
Chairman, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating.
Thank you.